Thank you, Mr. President. Thousands of Americans are protesting in communities across our country, demanding our country do better. The protests are an expression of grief for Ms. Taylor and Mr. Floyd and Mr. Arbery and Mr. Brooks, and for so many other Black Americans murdered by the people who were supposed to protect them. They're an expression of frustration and anger. It's 2020. It's the year 2020, a century and a half after the official end of slavery, 5.5 decades after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Still, Black Americans are fighting the same fight. They're also an expression of hope and patriotism. We demand our country do better. Demanding we live up to our founding ideals is one of the most patriotic things anyone can do. We need to listen to the Black voices leading these calls for justice and take real action. That's what Democrats want to do. My colleagues, Senator Harris and Senator Booker, in the Congressional Black Caucus in the House, have led our bicameral efforts and have a serious plan, the Justice and Policing Act. Everybody knows it's a serious plan. Everybody. It would implement real, meaningful reform. It would actually hold police accountable. It makes it clear, no more chokeholds, no more unchecked police misconduct, no more militarization of police misconduct. Of course, we know this isn't the only thing we need to do. Policing didn't create institutional racism. It's a product of it. It often reinforces it. We have a lot of work to do beyond this. But these reforms are an important start to making policing in our country more just. The Justice and Policing Act would create real change in our justice system, and communities across the country can't afford us to not act on this meaningful legislation. What we cannot do is pass something just called police reform that does so little to actually reform policing, and then turn around and tell Black mothers and fathers whose children have been slain, see, we solved it. Our work here is done. I respect Senator Scott. I appreciate his coming to the table and taking on this issue. I know he's fighting an uphill battle with his own caucus. I know that. So many on this side of the aisle don't want to do anything, but they think they need to check the box. I want to work with Senator Scott and with anyone of either party on real solutions. All of us on our side do. But I'm not willing to participate in a political charade, to vote on something that has no chance to lead to real change, and just to check a box, provide politicians with a talking point. It's an insult to Black families who have been fed empty promise after empty promise, year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. We need to listen to the communities that suffer the most at the hands of police violence. They all agree. The Senate Republican bill is simply not serious. It won't fix the problems. We'll be right back here sooner rather than later. Virtually every major civil rights group opposes this bill. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Urban League, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the Young Women's Christian Association, one of the most important civil rights and women's rights organizations in the country. It doesn't ban no-knock warrants. The Justice and Policing Act does. It doesn't stop the militarization of police departments. The Justice and Policing Act does. It doesn't create a national misconduct registry. The Justice and Policing Act does. It doesn't ban chokeholds. The Justice and Policing Act does. These are all steps that civil rights groups have said are critical to any reform effort. It's the bare minimum. All this bill offers is more studies of questions we already know the answers to. We don't need more studies. We don't need more task forces. We don't need, as Senator McConnell specializes in, we don't need more delaying tactics. We need accountability. The Justice Act could even put us in danger of moving the opposite direction by providing more funding for policing without adequate rules and regulations, without a similar investment in community support. The NAACP says this bill, and I quote, ignores the public demands to reimagine public safety by shrinking the purview of law enforcement and providing better funding to agencies equipped to address the critical needs of communities such as social services, mental health services, education. The Urban League says the Scott bill dances around the edges in a show of political posturing. We refuse to engage in that political posturing. We refuse to act like this is just a box we check and then we can move on. We refuse to insult Black Americans by pretending this is a serious effort. People have suffered too long for that. We've been here before. This isn't the first wave of protests or the second. In 2014, after the murders of Tamir Rice in my city of Cleveland and Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, President Obama's administration laid important groundwork for tax reform. They studied what reforms would be the most effective. They instituted consent decrees with cities to hold departments accountable. They created a roadmap that we could follow. But President Trump undid much of the progress the Obama administration made. The Urban League put out a plan for reform around the time of the murder of Tamir Rice, after Michael Brown's murder in 2014. Since then, nearly 1,300 black men and women, think of that, 1,300 black men and women have been fatally shot by police since the deaths of Michael Brown and Tamir Rice 6 years ago. This bill does nothing to stop the practices that killed them. Black Americans know their lives are put in danger by police every day. Let's listen to them. People all around the country, black and white and brown, in small towns and big cities, young and old, are listening, waking up, and joining the calls for change. The peaceful demonstrations and protests all over my state, in black neighborhoods, in white neighborhoods, in integrated communities, in small towns, in rural Ohio, in big cities, in suburbs, everywhere. Let's follow their lead. Let's actually hear the voices that have been silenced for too long. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to vote no, and instead to work with us on real, meaningful reform to transform our public safety system into one that actually keeps people safe.